The Confederation of Elevated Species had been running the galaxy for approximately 7,000 standard cycles, which was impressive considering most governmental bodies couldn't organize a decent lunch meeting without 3 committees and a ritual sacrifice. The CES prided itself on one particular metric that separated the civilized from the barbaric, the enlightened from the primitive, the worthy from the walking embarrassments. Gravitational field manipulation. If your species could bend gravity to your will, congratulations, you got a seat at the big kids' table. If you couldn't, well, there was always janitorial work. The theory was elegant, really. Gravity manipulation required not just technological achievement, but evolutionary superiority. Your species needed to develop specialized organs, quantum-entangled neural pathways, and a fundamental understanding of space-time that went beyond thing fall down, make boom. It was the ultimate flex, the cosmic mic drop, the universal my dad can beat up your dad, except your dad could make your opponent's dad weigh 17 tons with a casual thought. At the apex of this gravitational food chain lounged the Velthrak, because of course they did. 7 feet of scaled muscle, 4 arms that could each crush titanium, and cranial crests that sparkled with the bioluminescent organs responsible for their gravity manipulation. They'd been bending space-time since humanity was figuring out that sticks make decent tools if you hit things with them. Their homeworld, Velthrak Prime, had a gravitational constant roughly 0.6 times galactic standard, which meant they'd evolved to manipulate gravity out of sheer boredom rather than necessity. Velthrak children learned to make objects float before they learned to walk. Teenage Velthrak could create localized gravity wells for fun. Adult Velthrak could theoretically collapse a small moon if they were having a really bad day and someone had drunk the last of the coffee. They were, in every measurable way, the universe's way of showing off, which made the Interspecies Advancement Academy on Threshold Station a particularly interesting social experiment, if by interesting you meant occasionally lethal hierarchy establishment. Threshold Station orbited a neutron star in neutral space, which was either poetic or sadistic depending on your perspective. The station's artificial gravity could be adjusted by zone, allowing species from across the gravitational spectrum to attend. It was diversity at its finest, assuming diversity meant multiple species learning exactly where they ranked in the cosmic pecking order. The Velthrak students occupied the apex positions because the universe had a sense of irony, but not much sense. Below them clustered the Korthian, who could manipulate gravity but needed technological assistance, making them the equivalent of kids with training wheels. Then came the Zephyrim, the Quantics, the Helioform Collective, each species another rung down the ladder of gravitational superiority. And at the very bottom, occupying the social position typically reserved for parasites and spoiled lunch meat, sat humanity. Humans, the species that had barely figured out fusion power. The species whose idea of gravity manipulation was build a bigger rocket. The species that, when offered the chance to join the galactic community, had responded with, sounds fake but okay, and sent exchange students anyway. The CES had accepted humans as a courtesy, the way you might accept your friend's weird cousin at a party because technically they're family. Humans couldn't manipulate gravity. Humans couldn't even sense gravitational fields beyond the crude, I'm falling, this is bad response. Humans were, in the estimation of every serious xenobiologist, gravitationally disabled. Poor things. Our protagonist entered the scene on a Tuesday, which was technically called Rotation Day 5 in the station's calendar system. But she'd decided Tuesday was easier, and the universe could cope. She was 17 standard years old, 5'6", with dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail and the kind of expression that suggested she'd already calculated exactly how many nonsense she was willing to tolerate today. The answer was 0. But the galaxy hadn't gotten the memo. Her name wasn't important. She'd learned that introducing herself to Velthrak students resulted in them either forgetting immediately or deliberately mispronouncing her name in ways that suggested they thought humans communicated through throat gurgling. She answered to human, or hey you, or occasionally that thing, depending on who was feeling particularly diplomatic. She navigated Threshold Station's corridors with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned that looking confident prevented approximately 60% of potential confrontations. The other 40% were inevitable. But you worked with what you had. Her schedule showed advanced quantum mechanics in Sector 7, which she'd chosen specifically because it was challenging enough that most students were too busy crying about the math to notice the gravitationally challenged human in the back row. Her backpack bounced against her shoulders as she walked, a sturdy Earth-made thing with reinforced straps and enough compartments to hide a small armory. It was, by station standards, comically oversized. Most students used gravitational field manipulation to carry their materials, making objects float alongside them in neat, organized clusters. The human? She hauled everything on her back like some kind of pack animal, which the other species found alternately hilarious and pathetic. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know because observation had clearly died somewhere around the 5th millennium, was exactly what that backpack contained and why it mattered. The cafeteria occupied a massive space in Threshold Station's central ring, with adjustable gravity, zones marked by floor colors. Blue zones ran at 0.6 standard, Velthrak preference, green at 1.0 standard, the galactic average, yellow at 1.4 standard for the heavy worlders, and red at variable settings for species with exotic requirements. The human always sat in the green zone because the other options would either make her float embarrassingly or crush her into paste, and she preferred her paste-free existence. She'd made it through the food line, if you could call the nutrient dispensers a line, and was heading toward her usual corner table when the universe decided that Tuesday needed more excitement. Kravex noticed her first. Kravex was a Velthrak student in his final cycle, which meant he was approximately 22 in standard years, and suffering from that particular combination of physical superiority and emotional insecurity that made people insufferable across species boundaries. He stood 7'2", his scales polished to an aggressive sheen, his cranial crest practically glowing with gravitational power. He'd made bullying humans his personal hobby, the way some people collected stamps or developed interesting personality traits. "Look," Kravex announced to his cluster of followers, his voice carrying across the cafeteria with the confidence of someone who'd never experienced consequences. The human brought her burden sack again. His friends, and calling them friends was generous. They were more like remora attached to a particularly unpleasant shark, laughed on cue. There were 3 of them. Another Velthrak, a Korthian trying desperately to climb the social ladder, and a Zephyrim who really should have known better. The human kept walking. She'd learned that engaging with Kravex was like playing chess with a pigeon. No matter how well you played, the pigeon would knock over the pieces, defecate on the board, and strut around like it won. "Ignoring me?" Kravex pushed away from his table, and the movement was smooth and predatory, enhanced by the subtle gravity manipulation that made Velthrak seem to glide rather than walk. "That's rude. We're just curious about what the primitive carries in her primitive carrying device." The cafeteria had gone quiet in that particular way that meant everyone was watching, but nobody was going to intervene. Social hierarchies were sacred in the CES, and humans ranked somewhere between furniture and mildew. The human reached her table and set down her food tray with deliberate care. Her backpack stayed firmly on her shoulders. She'd made this calculation before. Showing weakness invited more aggression, but responding to aggression also invited more aggression. The optimal strategy was aggressive apathy, which was a contradiction that somehow worked. "It's called a backpack," she said, her tone suggesting she was explaining something to a particularly slow child. "It carries things. Radical concept, I know." Kravex's crest flared brighter, which was Velthrak body language for, "Oh, it's on now." He closed the distance between them in 3 gliding steps, his gravitational field extending outward in a way that made the air feel heavy and oppressive. "Maybe I should examine this backpack," he said, reaching out with one of his 4 arms. "Educational purposes, understanding primitive technology, cultural exchange." His fingers closed around the backpack's top strap. And that's when gravity changed its mind. The thing about Earth, the thing that every cosmic database had noted with clinical detachment and zero understanding of the implications, was that it had a gravitational constant of 9.8 meters per second squared. In galactic standard measurements, that translated to approximately 1.0 GSC, perfectly average, completely unremarkable, the vanilla ice cream of planetary gravity. What the databases failed to mention, what the Velthrak had never bothered to investigate, what the entire CES had overlooked because they were too busy congratulating themselves on their evolutionary superiority, was that Earth's gravity was relentless. It didn't negotiate. It didn't fluctuate. It didn't care about your feelings, your gravitational manipulation abilities, or your position in the social hierarchy. It pulled, constantly, eternally, with the patience of geological time and the flexibility of diamond. Humans had evolved under that pressure. Humans had been shaped by it, compressed by it, forged by it over millions of years. Human bones were dense calcium matrices designed to resist constant gravitational stress. Human muscles were bundles of fiber that had learned to operate under permanent load. Human cardiovascular systems were pumps calibrated to fight gravity with every heartbeat. Humans were, in effect, walking gravity resistance training equipment. And that backpack? That backpack contained Earth materials. Textbooks printed on Earth paper, made from Earth trees, with Earth ink. Notebooks with Earth metal spirals. Pens with Earth plastic casings. A laptop with rare earth elements in its circuits. Water bottles made from Earth polymers containing Earth water. Snacks packaged on Earth in Earth containers. Every molecule in that backpack had been forged in Earth's gravitational field. Every atom had spent its existence in 1.0 GSC. The materials had a gravitational memory, a quantum-level imprint that said, "This is normal, this is home, this is correct." When Kravex grabbed the backpack, his automatic response was to manipulate its gravitational field, to make it lighter, to demonstrate his superiority by making the burden weightless. His cranial organs flared, quantum-entangled particles danced, and he reached out with his field to reduce the backpack's effective mass. The Earth materials in the backpack felt this manipulation and responded with the diplomatic sophistication of a brick wall. "No." Kravex frowned, which was subtle on a Velthrak face, but noticeable if you knew what to look for. He increased power, pushing more energy, into his gravitational field manipulation. The backpack should have been floating by now, should have been dancing in the air like a feather in 0G. The backpack hung there, stubbornly, insistently, with the gravitational presence of a small moon. "What?" Kravex started to say. And then physics arrived to explain things in the way physics always explained things, violently and without regard for dignity. The conflict between Kravex's gravitational manipulation and the Earth material's quantum-level resistance to said manipulation created a localized instability. In technical terms, the competing gravitational fields established an oscillating resonance cascade. In practical terms, gravity in a 3-meter radius around Kravex had suddenly become negotiable, and it was negotiating with extreme prejudice. Kravex felt himself become heavier, then lighter, then heavier again. His gravitational manipulation organs flared desperately, trying to compensate. But fighting Earth-imprinted materials was like arguing with geometry. Technically possible, but ultimately futile. The human, still wearing the backpack, felt the gravitational fluctuations, but her Earth-adapted physiology handled them with the casual efficiency of a system designed to operate under constant 1.0 GSC. Her inner ear adjusted, her muscles compensated, her bones bore the stress without comment. Kravex, evolved in 0.6 GSC and dependent on gravitational manipulation to function, handled the fluctuations with all the grace of a drunk rhinoceros on a tightrope. He stumbled. His other 3 arms windmilled for balance. His cranial crest flickered erratically as his organs struggled to stabilize the field. The gravitational oscillation was spreading, rippling outward from the backpack like waves from a stone dropped in a pond. His 3 friends, standing too close, got caught in the field instability. The other Velthrak student suddenly weighed twice his normal mass and collapsed to the floor with a crash that echoed through the cafeteria. The Korthian went temporarily weightless, yelped, and floated upward until his head hit the ceiling with a dull thunk. The Zephyrim, whose species had limited gravitational resistance, experienced the fluctuation as violent nausea and immediately vomited a substance that was probably breakfast but looked like a crime scene. Kravex, still gripping the backpack strap, was stuck in the epicenter of the gravitational chaos. Every time he tried to manipulate his way out, the Earth materials pushed back, creating more instability, more oscillation, more evidence that you should never pick a fight with planetary-scale geological processes. The human, watching Kravex struggle with the expression of someone observing a particularly unimpressive science experiment, calmly reached up and unhooked his fingers from her backpack strap. The moment Kravex lost physical contact, his gravitational manipulation organs cut their connection to the backpack. The field, instability collapsed immediately. Gravity returning to normal so abruptly that everyone caught in the effect dropped, bounced, or otherwise reacquainted themselves with the concept of down. Kravex hit the floor on all 4s, breathing hard, his scales dulled with stress, his cranial crest barely flickering. He looked up at the human with an expression that contained confusion, humiliation, and the dawning horror of someone realizing they'd miscalculated badly. The cafeteria had gone absolutely silent. 300 students from 40 different species stared at the scene with the focused attention of people witnessing either a miracle or a disaster, and not sure which. The human adjusted her backpack straps, picked up her food tray, and sat down at her table as if nothing interesting had happened. "It's just a backpack," she said, her tone conversational. "Carries things. Not that complicated." Kravex scrambled to his feet, all of them, and retreated to his table with the speed of someone who'd just discovered that the food chain had unexpected complications. His friends followed, the Velthrak still looking dazed, the Korthian rubbing his head, the Zephyrim trying to clean vomit off his frontal appendages. The human opened her lunch container and began eating something that looked like a sandwich, which was apparently a human food concept involving bread and structural engineering. The cafeteria slowly, cautiously, returned to normal noise levels. Students whispered, speculated, and revised their understanding of humans from harmless weaklings to possibly dangerous if provoked. Query further research needed. The incident might have ended there, might have become just another strange cafeteria story, except the station's automated monitoring systems had flagged the gravitational anomaly. When localized gravity destabilized, safety protocols demanded investigation. Within 15 minutes, 3 security officers and a science team had arrived to scan the area, interview witnesses, and generally make everyone's day more bureaucratic. The lead investigator was a Korthian named Thex, who'd seen approximately everything in his 40 cycles of service, and was consequently surprised by approximately nothing. He listened to Kravex's stammering explanation, interviewed several witnesses who provided contradictory accounts because eyewitness testimony was universally terrible regardless of species, and finally approached the human's table. "Explain," Thex said, which was his preferred interview technique. Why waste time with actual questions when you could just demand information? The human swallowed her bite of sandwich and looked up with an expression of weaponized innocence. Explain what? The gravitational disturbance centered on your carrying device. My backpack? It's a backpack. It exists. It has mass. Mass creates gravity. Physics. She gestured vaguely with her sandwich. You know, fundamental universal constants? Thex's sensory appendages quivered with irritation. The disturbance was not consistent with normal gravitational fields. There was an oscillation, a resonance cascade, Oh, that. The human set down her sandwich with exaggerated care. That was Kravex trying to manipulate Earth materials. Turns out that doesn't work great. Who knew? Her tone suggested she'd known exactly this would happen and had been waiting for someone to test the theory. Earth materials? Thex pulled out a scanning device, which looked like a particularly aggressive tuning fork. What's special about Earth materials? Nothing. That's the point. They're normal. For Earth, which has 1.0 GSC, same as galactic standard, except Earth's gravity is... She paused, searching for the right word. The stubborn. It's been pulling consistently for about 4.5 billion years. Everything from Earth is kind of gravitationally imprinted with that. Doesn't like being manipulated. Thex scanned the backpack with his device. The readings made his secondary eyes widen, which was Korthian body language for, "This is unexpected and I don't enjoy unexpected things." These materials are exhibiting quantum-level resistance to field manipulation, he said slowly. The gravitational signature is locked. It's like they're anchored to a constant reference frame. Yeah, we call that being from Earth. The human took another bite of her sandwich. Everything from Earth has that. The planet doesn't negotiate, hasn't negotiated for billions of years, probably won't start now just because some aliens asked nicely. Thex's investigation had attracted attention from the science team, who were now scanning the backpack with increasingly sophisticated equipment and making increasingly agitated noises. One of them, a quantics researcher with more degrees than most species had appendages, was gesticulating excitedly with her probability field manipulators. This is remarkable, the quantics breathed. The quantum coherence across all these materials, they're all locked to the same gravitational constant. It's like they're all remembering where they came from. I've never seen anything like this outside of neutron star material. We call it stuff, the human offered helpfully. But sure, quantum coherence works too. Can I examine your carrying device more closely? The quantics asked, her manipulators quivering with academic excitement. Can you give it back when you're done? Of course. The human shrugged, slipped off her backpack, and handed it over. The moment it left her shoulders, 3 scientists immediately noticed something interesting. "How much does this weigh?" Thex asked, his arms straining slightly under the backpack's mass. "About 15 kilos, the human said. "Maybe 16 with the water bottles." 15 kilos? The Quantix researcher checked her scanner. "This feels much heavier." "Only if you're from a low-G world and your body never learned what mass actually feels like." The human's tone had sharpened slightly. "To me, it's just a backpack. To you, it's apparently shocking that objects have mass, and mass has weight under gravity. Real groundbreaking stuff, truly revolutionary." The scientists had carried the backpack to a nearby table and were now unpacking it with the careful enthusiasm of archaeologists discovering a particularly interesting tomb. Textbooks emerged. Heavy earth paper, bound with earth adhesive. Notebooks with metal spirals. Pens and pencils. A laptop that made the Quantix researcher gasp when she lifted it. This computational device, the density of the materials. She scanned it frantically. The rare earth elements in this are gravitationally locked too. Everything is locked, every component. "Well, yeah," the human said, still sitting at her table and watching the scientific breakdown with mild amusement. "It was made on Earth. Every atom in it spent its entire existence in 1.0 GSC. That's just normal. But your species doesn't manipulate gravity," the Quantix said, still scanning. "You don't use gravitational fields for manufacturing or construction or material refinement. You just build things under constant gravitational load. We call it regular construction, yeah. Gravity pulls, we build anyway. Everything we make has to work under constant 1.0 GSC or it fails. It's not complicated. We've been doing it for thousands of years." The scientists exchanged glances that communicated complex academic concepts along the lines of, "Holy shit," and "we missed something significant," and "someone's dissertation is now obsolete." Thex, who'd been watching this scientific revelation with the weary patience of someone who'd have to file approximately 12 reports about this incident, turned back to the human. "Did you know this would happen?" The human's expression was magnificently innocent. "Did I know that trying to gravitationally manipulate Earth materials would cause problems? Gosh, no. That's never come up before. I mean, it's not like every object from Earth has been operating under constant gravitational pressure for longer than most of your species have existed. How could I possibly predict physics?" Her tone could have cut glass. "You knew," Thex said flatly. "I knew that Earth stuff is heavy and doesn't like being manipulated." The human admitted. "I didn't know it would cause a localized gravitational cascade. That was a fun surprise. Educational, even. Really brings home the importance of understanding material science before grabbing strangers' property." Thex rubbed his cranial ridge with one appendage. "I'll need to file a report about this incident." "Cool. Can I have my backpack back? Some of us have class." The scientists had finished their examination and were now arguing in 3 different languages about research proposals and testing protocols. The Quantix researcher reluctantly returned the backpack to the human, who shouldered it with the casual ease of someone who'd been carrying significant mass her entire life. "Thank you for your cooperation," Thex said formally. "No disciplinary action will be taken against you." How generous, considering I was the one being harassed. The human stood, collected her tray, and headed toward the cafeteria exit. She paused near Kravex's table, where the Velthrak student was still looking shell-shocked and significantly less arrogant than 30 minutes ago. "Hey," she said, and her voice carried across the quiet cafeteria. "Fun fact about Earth. Our gravity is 1.0 GSC. Which sounds average, right? Perfectly normal? Here's the thing, though. Earth's gravity has been 1.0 GSC every single day for 4.5 billion years. Never fluctuates, never negotiates. Just pulls, constantly, forever. Everything on Earth evolved under that pressure. Every human who's ever lived trained under that pressure. Every object we make is built to work under that pressure. She adjusted her backpack straps. So when you tried to manipulate my stuff, my Earth stuff, you weren't fighting me. You were fighting 4.5 billion years of geological consistency. And geology? She smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. Geology doesn't care about your social hierarchy. She walked out of the cafeteria, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders with every step. Each bounce a small demonstration of mass and gravity and the fundamental stubbornness of Earth materials. The story should have ended there, but stories on Threshold Station never ended when they should. They metastasized, evolved, and generally made everyone's life more complicated. Within hours, the incident had spread through the student population with the efficiency of a viral outbreak. Different species had different interpretations, but the core facts remained. A human had somehow resisted Velthrak gravitational manipulation. Earth materials were apparently gravitationally locked in ways that made them resistant to field manipulation. And Kravex had been thoroughly humiliated in front of 300 witnesses. The social hierarchy hadn't just been questioned. It had been introduced to physics and found wanting. By the next day, the human found herself in an unexpected situation. People were avoiding her, not out of contempt, the usual motivation, but out of uncertainty and possibly respect, which was weird and uncomfortable, and honestly she preferred contempt, because at least that was familiar. The quantics researcher, whose name was apparently Weiss, had requested permission to study Earth materials more thoroughly. The human had agreed on the condition that Weiss stopped referring to her as the human specimen and started using her actual name. Weiss had agreed, stumbled through the pronunciation of Emily approximately 7 times, and settled on M, which was close enough. Emily discovered that being the subject of xenobiological fascination was only slightly better than being the subject of xenobiological contempt. Weiss wanted to study her bone density, her muscle composition, her cardiovascular system. Other researchers joined in, all of them eager to understand how Earth's unremarkable gravity had produced such remarkable gravitational resistance. "You're essentially wearing weighted training equipment all the time," Weiss explained during one examination, her manipulators quivering with academic excitement. "Every moment of your life, you're experiencing 1.0 GSC. Your species never gets a break, never experiences low G rest. You're constantly fighting gravity just to exist." "We call that living," Emily said dryly. "But sure, if you want to make it sound dramatic." The research had revealed something that sent shockwaves through the CES academic community. Humans were chronically gravitationally stressed. Their bones were overbuilt for galactic standard gravity. Their muscles were overdeveloped. Their cardiovascular systems were working at what other species would consider emergency levels, just to maintain basic function. Humans, it turned out, were living in a permanent state of what other species would consider heavy world adaptation. Except Earth wasn't technically a heavy world. It was perfectly average by galactic standards. It was just average without any breaks, any relief, any variation. It's like your entire species has been in gravitational training for millions of years, Weiss said, reading over her research data. "You're adapted to resist gravitational manipulation because Earth's gravity can't be manipulated. It's constant. So you evolved to work under constant load." "Yep," We're basically really stubborn because our planet is really stubborn. Evolutionary consistency. Emily paused. Does this mean people will stop calling me primitive? The CES will need to revise its gravitational hierarchy classifications, Weiss said carefully. Humans don't manipulate gravity, that's true. But you resist gravitational manipulation in ways that suggest you're naturally adapted to counter it. That's significant. Significant enough that people will stop trying to steal my lunch? Probably. The social fallout continued over the following weeks. Kravex had become a cautionary tale. The Velthrak student who'd tried to bully the gravitationally stubborn human and ended up humiliated. He'd stopped his harassment completely, though whether from respect or fear was unclear, and Emily didn't particularly care about the distinction. Other Velthrak students approached her differently now, not friendly exactly, but wary. Respectful in the way you might respect a piece of equipment that had suddenly revealed unexpected capabilities. A few even asked about Earth, about training under constant gravity, about how humans built things without gravitational manipulation. Emily answered honestly, humans built things the hard way, because Earth didn't offer an easy way. Gravity pulled, always, forever, and humans had learned to work within that constraint rather than around it. The CES eventually published a revised understanding of gravitational adaptation that acknowledged resistance as equivalent to manipulation for purposes of species classification. Humans were reclassified from gravitationally disabled to gravitationally specialized, which Emily thought was a diplomatic way of saying we were wrong but don't want to admit it directly. The incident spawned a new field of study: gravitational persistence and material quantum coherence. Researchers wanted to understand how Earth's consistent gravitational field had imprinted itself on materials at a quantum level. Some proposed using Earth materials as gravitational anchors for sensitive equipment. Others suggested that studying human physiology could provide insights into gravitational resistance training for species planning to colonize heavy worlds. Emily found the attention exhausting, but occasionally useful. Her social position had shifted from bottom of the hierarchy to unclear, but probably don't mess with her. People left her alone, which was honestly all she'd wanted in the first place. 6 months after the cafeteria incident, Emily was preparing for her return to Earth at the end of her exchange year. She'd packed her backpack, the same Earth-made backpack that had caused so much chaos, and was heading toward the transport dock when Weiss caught up with her. "Before you go," the Quantix researcher said, her manipulators twitching nervously, "I wanted to thank you. Your cooperation with our research has been invaluable. We've learned so much about gravitational adaptation and material coherence, and you learned that Earth stuff is stubborn, and humans are stubborn because Earth is stubborn," Emily interrupted. "Not exactly revolutionary." "But it is," Weiss insisted. "The CES has based its entire hierarchy on gravitational manipulation, and you've shown us there's another approach: resistance, persistence, adaptation to what can't be changed rather than changing what exists. That's profound." Emily shrugged her backpack higher on her shoulders. The weight was familiar, comfortable, exactly what she'd carried for 17 years of her life. "We just call it Tuesday, but I'm glad the research worked out. Will you come back to Threshold Station? Maybe, if they ask nicely and promise Kravex has graduated?" Emily smiled slightly. "Though, honestly, I kinda miss Earth gravity. Station gravity is too negotiable, too variable. It's weird not having constant 1.0 GSC pulling on you every second." "You miss fighting gravity?" "I miss knowing exactly what gravity will do. Earth gravity doesn't surprise you, doesn't fluctuate, doesn't get manipulated by random bullies in the cafeteria. It just pulls, constantly, and you adapt or you don't. There's something comfortable about that consistency. Vice's manipulators formed a pattern that indicated thoughtful consideration. Humans are strange. Humans are stubborn. There's a difference. Emily headed toward the docking port, her backpack bouncing with each step, 15 kilos of Earth materials moving exactly as Earth materials should move under gravity. Behind her, Threshold Station continued its rotation around the neutron star. Artificial gravity zones humming with power. Species from across the galaxy learning and growing, and occasionally discovering that the hierarchy they'd built was more fragile than they'd thought. The Confederation of Elevated Species had spent 7,000 cycles congratulating itself on gravitational manipulation, building an entire civilization around the ability to bend space-time to collective will. They'd classified species by their capacity to manipulate gravity, created social structures around this single metric, and generally assumed that if you couldn't manipulate gravity, you were inferior. What they'd failed to consider, what Emily's backpack had demonstrated with the diplomatic subtlety of a gravitational collapse, was that there might be value in not manipulating gravity, in adapting to what couldn't be changed rather than changing what existed, in becoming so fundamentally comfortable with gravitational pressure that resistance became second nature. Earth hadn't given humans the ability to manipulate gravity. Earth had given them something potentially more useful. 4.5 billion years of consistent gravitational pressure that had forged a species incapable of negotiating with physics. And when Kravex had grabbed that backpack, when he'd tried to impose his will on materials that had spent their entire existence under Earth's relentless pull, he'd learned a fundamental lesson that the CES had somehow missed. Gravity doesn't care about your social hierarchy. It pulls constantly and forever with the patience of geological time and the flexibility of diamond. You can try to manipulate it, bend it, negotiate with it. Or you can do what Earth does, what Earth materials do, what humans do. You can just be consistently, stubbornly, relentlessly yourself under constant pressure until anything trying to change you gets tired and gives up. The bully had grabbed her backpack, and gravity, real Earth gravity, imprinted at the quantum level into every atom of every material, had changed its mind about being manipulated. Turns out physics doesn't negotiate.